Everyone in this White House continues to mourn the victims and keep their friends and families in our thoughts and prayers.
We're ready with a response, a purposeful, forceful, but reasonable, immediate response.
My sole focus, commitment, and responsibility is about our own nation, our own security.
Who should replace you as DNC chair?
Well, I will let the members of the DNC determine that.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides. Trump's tariffs. It's a phrase you've heard before. I guarantee you will hear it again. The president's threatened tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico, which, by the way, constitute 40% of all U.S. trade globally, are due to take effect tomorrow. Goods from China could be subjected to a 10% tariff, while those from Mexico and Canada face tariffs of 25%. The president said this afternoon these actions are about reducing the U.S. trade deficit with those countries and slowing the flow of illicit drugs into this country.
We have big deficits with, as you know, with all three of them. And in one case, they're sending massive amounts of fentanyl, killing hundreds of thousands of people a year with the fentanyl. And in the other two cases, they're making it possible for this poison to get in.
Critical clues in the search for answers over why a passenger jet and Army Black Hawk helicopter collided near Reagan National Airport, killing 67 people. Divers recovered the plane's flight data recorders today, while divers also work to recover more victims and, when possible, with currents and other hazards, salvage the aircraft and remains of the helicopter. This, while President Trump continues to deal with fallout, and that's putting it mildly, over his claims, which he admitted had no underlying evidence, that diversity, equity, and inclusion programs could have somehow been implicated in the crash. I want to start tonight with Aaron Navarro and Katie Watson. Katie Watson is on the north line of the White House. Aaron Navarro is with me here. Aaron, catch our audience up on what we learned about the investigation and other developments.
We heard from the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, as we saw Trump tweet and blame the helicopter for essentially being at too high of an elevation level. And you saw Caroline Leavitt say that that was based off info authorities gave him. We're only on day 2 of this investigation, still early, but that is what authorities have told Trump. Important to note that he's still getting briefed on everything regarding this crash while he's still kind of implicating DEI, as you mentioned, right, without any underlying proof.
And we should also remind our viewers that the day before, right after the crash happened, he suggested it was an air traffic controller problem. So he is kind of all over the map here in suggesting things that it is the NTSB's sole authority to determine.
And he said this in an executive memo as well last week. Is saying that essentially standards under the Biden administration allowed people with certain disabilities to get hired in the FAA, not necessarily as air traffic controllers, but just generally in that agency. And that's generally where Trump has focused in on. He noted an Obama-era policy in 2013. There was a diversity and inclusion page that said there was a special emphasis when it comes to hiring those who have a targeted disability. That could be those with problems with vision or hearing, or those with, quote, severe intellectual disability. That policy is no longer online, but that is where Trump is trying to tack on to this whole conversation regarding DEI.
But those of you who watched last night's America Decides remember Nancy Cordes making it fundamentally clear that that language on that website was there the entire first Trump administration. Katie Watson joining us from the North Lawn. It's great to have you with us. Talk to us about what the president told reporters this afternoon about the tariffs.
Yeah, well, the president made a few announcements on tariffs just a few moments ago from the Oval Office. He said, for one thing, just to back up a little bit, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed today that the U.S. is going to go ahead with tariffs on Mexico and Canada. These 25% tariffs will go into effect tomorrow, she said. But the president today announced a few more things that he hopes to impose tariffs on. The big ones really were oil and gas. He said sometime next month, probably around February 18th. Those are going to go into effect. We didn't really hear too many details on specific countries, if this is going to be en masse or what it's going to look like, but that's what he said. But the president also floated some other tariffs that he said he hopes to impose soon at some point. He didn't really give a timeline, and those would include on copper, one thing he mentioned, additional tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, as well as on pharmaceuticals. He said all types of drugs. So pretty sweeping proposal that the president made this afternoon. We're just trying to get more details on those things.
Trying to get more details. A near constant endeavor at the Trump White House. And Katie, I sympathize with your and everyone else there's efforts. In the soundbite we played of the president, he said hundreds of thousands of fentanyl deaths in the United States. Just to correct the record on that, about 70 to 80,000 overdose deaths in our country annually for about the last decade. About 70% of those fentanyl related. They're high and horrible numbers, but they're not as high as President Trump indicated. Katie, can you also walk us through some of the things either the president said or did about the federal workforce?
Yeah, well, basically, as we have been discussing for the last couple of days here, right, we've heard about all of these memos that have been coming out of OPM regarding what will happen with the federal workforce, this buyout program that the federal government is imposing. But another thing that the president has been repeating and that his White House has been repeating is just trying to end all of these DEI programs that they say have been instituted by previous administrations. We had some good reporting from Ellie Watson and my other colleagues today about, for instance, the intelligence arm of the Pentagon saying that they're no longer going to celebrate not only things like for instance, Juneteenth or MLK Day, very important, but as well as other holidays like Holocaust Remembrance Day. So we're really seeing kind of the implications of the president's orders, executive orders, if you will, play out in the federal workforce agency by agency.
Aaron, I want to ask you about something that we have just learned this afternoon about the future of federal websites and their availability to the general public.
Sources have told CBS News that a lot of federal government websites will go dark, in a sense, by 5 p.m. today, potentially in relation to kind of erasing any resemblance of anything regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. That has been a big mission of this administration. You saw White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt say that Trump wants the FAA and Department of Transportation to scrub anything regarding DEI in regards to hiring. You've seen many executive orders from Trump regarding scrubbing anything related to DEI. So that's what we've learned.
And when these websites come back online, we'll be able to compare and contrast to see if there are other things scrubbed from these websites. But that's pretty astonishing because the general public interacts with these websites at all hours of all days of the week.
It's also just fascinating to see the place DEI now has in the first couple weeks of the Trump administration. This was something that maybe had its roots in Florida with Governor Ron DeSantis and what he was trying to do with education there, and is now a constant focus for the Trump White House in their next couple of weeks. It's something Trump talked about on the campaign trail, to be fair, but certainly a focus in week 2.
If you add them up, ladies and gentlemen, you'll find far more references to DEI than inflation. Probably didn't have that on your post-election bingo card. Aaron Navarro, Katie Watson, thank you very much. Significant changes are happening right now at the FBI. Top officials have been told to retire, resign, or be fired by Monday. Justice Department reporter Jake Rosen is here now. Jake, catch us up on the details.
Well, that's right, Major. It started on Monday when the Department of Justice and interim head there decided to fire about a dozen officials who worked on Jack Smith's team. Jack Smith, as you'll remember, is the special prosecutor who investigated Donald Trump's post-2020 election actions in addition to his handling of classified documents. We're now seeing that same move to kind of retaliate while there are no actual heads of the Department of Justice and the FBI today. CBS News can report that the teams who investigated the January 6th attack at the Capitol at the FBI, in addition to the FBI agents who worked on those 2 Jack Smith probes, which obviously resulted in no real court case or charges against Donald Trump that really went to court. We've heard that those teams are being fired by the end of today, and potentially there's a list of other agents going through the FBI and Department of Justice right now who, again, like you said, are being told to retire or be fired by the beginning of next week.
And as I understand it, Jake, in meetings that the FBI Agents Association had with Kash Patel, who has gone through part of the confirmation process this week on Capitol Hill, he and others assured them that this would not happen, yet it's going on.
Yes, and this was promised by Kash Patel out loud at the hearing yesterday publicly in front of television cameras, reporters, and senators. He said that there would be no retribution while he was in charge of the FBI. Now, obviously, the caveat to that is Kash Patel has not yet been named the head of the FBI. There's currently an interim head now, same as we saw with the Department of Justice, that this kind of purge that we've seen this week since Monday into Friday now has really come with these interim department heads, so that Pam Bondi, who is likely to be the next Attorney General, and Kash Patel, who certainly seems headed to be the next FBI director, kind of have cover by the Trump administration to kind of do what Donald Trump has said all along for the last 2+ years. He intends on retributing and going after really a lot of these people who he sees as problems within the government and intelligence agencies.
Jake Rosen, thank you very much.
We're ready with a response, a purposeful, forceful, but reasonable, immediate response.
You probably recognize him, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, weighing in. What the tax on goods could mean for Americans. That's the whole tariff conversation. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Trump administration sweeping tariffs on our three biggest trading partners, Canada, Mexico, and China, set to go in effect tomorrow. I want to bring in David Wessel for analysis. He is Senior Fellow for Economic Studies at the Brookings Institution, someone I've known for a long time and admired each and every year I've known him. David, this is no longer theoretical. Stock traders and economic analysts and others were saying, oh, Trump talks a big game, but it's not really going to happen, or it won't happen to the effect he promises. It sounds like it's going to.
That's absolutely right. I mean, we still don't know the details. Exactly what are these tariffs going to apply to? Is it everything? What is his objective here? It's very unusual to say we're going to use tariffs to get you to stop sending fentanyl precursors or people to the United States. So I think a lot of people are thinking, yeah, he's going to impose these tariffs and he's going to try and make a deal. On the other hand, we know that Mexico and Canada and perhaps even China are going to retaliate. So that's going to complicate things and may make life difficult for our exporters. He's trying to reduce our imports, but remember, we export about 11% of GDP, and that's going to be affected if these countries impose tariffs on our exports.
And David, as I looked at the numbers, let's just deal with Mexico for a second. $129 billion last year in autos or auto parts trade with Mexico. 50% of U.S. auto parts come to the United States either from Mexico or Canada. That's just one sector of the economy. People will feel this.
Right. Absolutely. So it's the auto industry is very integrated across Canada and Mexico. So one question is the president really going to impose these tariffs on parts that are going back and forth to U.S. plants? Because that's going to be really disruptive, or will he not? The other thing is we import a lot of fruit and vegetables from Mexico. And we don't have domestic suppliers in the winter who can supply those. So people are going to see an increase in prices. I don't think it's going to be an enormous increase in the inflation rate. That'll be small. We only import about 15% of GDP. But in specific sectors, this is going to be a real effect. And I expect Democrats are going to be calling attention every time a price goes up. They're going to blame it all on President Trump, and we'll see how he handles that.
And David, let's talk about energy. As I understand it, Canada is the largest supplier of U.S. energy imports on an annual basis. 1.4 billion barrels of crude oil, 60% of our total imports last year came from Canada.
Right, but remember, the U.S. now produces more than enough oil to meet its own needs. So we are now an oil exporter. The president seems to think that if by making it's kind of weird because on one hand, he wants to lower oil prices, but that's going to have less incentive for U.S. producers to drill. On the other hand, he wants to raise prices, apparently, by taxing these imports, which will make it more attractive for American producers to drill. So it's very confusing. But again, it can only help increase prices, and that's not what he ran on. So this is going to be really interesting over the next few weeks.
And David, what is your expectation based on what you've been reading, what you've been reporting, what you've been analyzing about the likely response from Canada, Mexico, China?
I'm absolutely certain that Canada and Mexico will respond with compensatory tariffs. Whether they also make an offer to him to do something on immigration and fentanyl remains to be seen. And I expect the same is true in the Chinese. I think the Chinese really hope they can make a deal with President Trump. They think he's very transactional, and they're trying to find a way to defuse the thing. But I think they won't be afraid to block exports of things that we need from China, because we are dependent on China for a number of rare earths and stuff like that. And someday we may be domestic producers, but we're not yet.
And I have to believe, David, and I'd like your thoughts on this, that Canada and Mexico might reasonably say, Mr. President, not only are we your geographic neighbors, our economies are integrated, as you indicated, David, but if you're talking about fentanyl or trade deficits, China is the much bigger problem. Much larger trade deficit, U.S. to China, than it has with Canada or Mexico. And fentanyl comes through Mexico to the United States, but it originates many times in China. And yet China is getting the lesser of these tariffs to come.
Absolutely. And don't forget, we have a trade agreement, the USMCA trade agreement that President Trump negotiated. He took an old treaty and made it, what he said, better. And so we have this pact with them, and he's tearing it up. And you're absolutely right. If our enemy is China, why are we going bigger tariffs on Mexico and Canada? And why are we spending all this time talking about DEI as if DEI was the one that was eroding American jobs? It's really, really hard to figure out what the strategy is here.
We had gremlins galore in David Wessel's Zoom. That's not his fault or our fault. It's just gremlins. They exist. They complicated the video just a little bit. David Wessel, thanks for being with us. Hope to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Tulsi Gabbard on shaky ground as lawmakers press Trump's pick to be Director of National Intelligence on a wide range of topics, from her views on Russia to Edward Snowden. A closer look at all that next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for being with us. Tulsi Gabbard's nomination for Director of National Intelligence might be in trouble. Republican lawmakers were among those skeptical of the former Democrats' views on Russia and government whistleblower, that's putting it in one terminology, Edward Snowden. Others describe Edward Snowden as a far more difficult thing than a whistleblower. To discuss this and Kash Patel and RFK Jr. and some other topics, I want to bring in our political panel, Sabrina Rodriguez and Finn Gomez. Sabrina, national politics reporter at The Washington Post. Finn, of course, our political director at CBS News. All right, I want to read to you both this dramatically. I'm not going to play the soundbite. I'm just going to read it. This is Josh Hawley, Republican senator from Missouri, on Fox last night. I'm worried by what I'm hearing from some of my Republican colleagues. This is about Tulsi Gabbard. I'm worried that her nomination may be in jeopardy. That sounds like what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean,
Finn?
And people close to the White House have told me, and who have been involved with the Gabbard push to get her nominated, to get her passed and confirmed. Have said that yes, that there could be some trouble ahead for Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, it's not because she was hoping for a Pete Hegseth type of confirmation hearing, where the Republicans like toe the line, come and back her up.
Yeah,
and if you're seeing some support erode on the Republican side, it doesn't bode well at this point.
And Sabrina, the big difference for Tulsi Gabbard is she does not have the full court press that Pete Hegseth got. And with that full court press, he still needed J.D. Vance, the vice president, to cast the tie-breaking vote.
Absolutely not. Tulsi is not being afforded the same full court press, the same show of support from the president. I think that's a key piece here too. We don't hear Donald Trump talking all day about his support for Tulsi Gabbard, how much he's rooting for her and pushing for her. That is something we saw consistently over the weeks before Pete Hegseth's confirmation. I think there is an awareness amongst Republicans that she is by far the most endangered, but she's also in this period of time where, again, so much focus was on Pete Hegseth, but now we're getting to those nominations nominations, the touchier ones, which I know we're going to be talking more about, but RFK Jr., Kash Patel, her position as well. And I think there's, for members of Congress right now, for senators, there are a lot of questions around her past comments and her lack of real justification for them.
Point on that, her past comments and curiosity or hesitation about those past comments was in evidence when Kansas Republican Senator Jerry Moran asked Gabbard about Russia. Let's listen to that.
I want to make certain that in no way does Russia get a pass in either your mind or your heart, or in any policy recommendation you would make or not make.
Senator, I'm offended by the question because my sole focus, commitment, and responsibility is about our own nation, our own security, and the interests of the American people.
And Finn, another thing that came up, Edward Snowden. Just to remind the audience, former NSA contractor, he leaked 1 million classified documents and has been defended by Tulsi Gabbard, and yesterday took to social media to defend her nomination as Director of National Intelligence. That's part of this conversation as well.
No, absolutely. And I mean, as you said at the beginning of this segment, for some, a whistleblower. For others,
traitor.
Absolutely.
That's the terminology applied by those protective of U.S. intelligence.
And I'm old enough to remember that when Republicans believed that he was a traitor, and the fact that that still exists. I mean, and I'm sorry, but him posting in support of her doesn't really help her at all, frankly. So
she could very much more use a post from President Trump.
Exactly.
Sabrina.
Yes, and her answer on the question of Edward Snowden was not a compelling argument, was not a forceful one, similar to on Russia. She really tried to, navigate against it. I even, noted it down, where she said it would not be her responsibility to advocate for any actions related to Snowden. That doesn't sound like you are forcefully against him in this.
And it's not like she's not going for, this is not Interior Secretary, right? This is specifically because of this. It's
Director of National Intelligence is the repository for all the intelligence agencies, the chief analytical office at the top of the intelligence pyramid of information.
Exactly, and Edward Snowden is someone that if you want this job, you have to go firmly against that, I believe, and she did not do that.
Sabrina, I want to ask you about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., also different than Tulsi Gabbard. He has a separate, definable MAGA world support base. Make America healthy again. Whatever troubles he's having in the confirmation hearing, and he had several. He couldn't answer basic questions about Medicare, Medicaid. He was kind of holding to this idea, I'm for science about vaccines, but that didn't seem to please Republican senators and certainly not Democratic senators. Yet I still think because of this wellspring of MAGA-related support, RFK Jr., not a cinch to be confirmed, but you can't rule him out.
I do not think you can rule him out at all. I think all eyes will definitely be in the coming days on Senator Cassidy, who's the top
Bill Cassidy
Republican.
from Louisiana.
He, a physician, he brought up, his own track record, his own, past, and raised questions about, Kennedy's anti-vax past and the fact that what was coming out of his mouth in the hearings this week does not match what we have countless numbers of videos and countless numbers of commentary that he has made over the years, and now is just trying to say, oh, no, vaccines, yes, I support them, I wouldn't change it. But the facts are the facts, what he has been saying for years and things that he's been saying recently as a few months ago. So I think we need to be looking at Senator Cassidy as one of those key Republican votes. And again, I think, we were talking about this off camera where it's like, okay, is there a question of will they get through? And I think for these three, there is a real open question if it's going to be doable.
And the third of the three would be Kash Patel at FBI. Very quickly, Sabrina, I'd like your thoughts, if you could, distilling all the actions President Trump has taken regarding the federal workforce.
It's been so much in the last, I think... for anyone watching at home, I feel like there is an overwhelming sense of, okay, there has been so much going on. And I think for us, too, we're grappling with how much news has happened in the last hour. Right. Or, okay, I can talk to you about what Trump said yesterday, but he said 5 other things in the last 30 minutes. So I think really there is this question of what exactly is going to happen with the workforce. He made very clear on the campaign trail how much he wanted to reduce it, how he wanted to, get rid of some of the leases of public workspace. He wanted people to come back to work. I think there's a question of the legality of it, of how doable it is, but that he wants to do it, he has made clear he does.
2.1 million people work in the federal workforce. 70% of them, in one way or another, have occupations related to national security. Just keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. Sabrina Rodriguez, Finn Gomez, thanks so much.
Nice time.
What do Democrats need to do to get back in the game politically? What the outgoing head of the Democratic National Committee says about that question and much more. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Jamie Harrison's time as chair of the Democratic National Committee coming to a close. There's an election to replace him tomorrow. Our Ed O'Keefe, sat down with Harrison to talk about what the party got wrong and what it needs to get right in the future.
Who should replace you as DNC chair?
Well, I will let the members of the DNC determine that. But the one thing that we're going to hand over a strong Democratic Party. I've been in this building now for 8 years. 4 years as associate chair under Tom Perez, and then 4 years as DNC chair. When I think back to the DNC, when we walked in this door in 2017, this place is much stronger than what it was at that point in time. The data and the tech investments that we've made under my chairmanship, people talk about Howard Dean and the 50-state strategy. We've had 50-state strategy on steroids because we've invested more money into state parties than any time in the history of the DNC. 176 years, no DNC has ever invested this amount of resources. And now we have set a new floor for what the next DNC has to do. We have a red state fund. You got to continue to invest in red states, help them build the infrastructure. We need to go back to voter registration. For the first time in 20 years, the DNC went back into the voter registration game. And that's part of the reason why we beat back the red wave in terms of the midterm election. And so there's a new floor now for where we need to be as a party. And we know that some of it works because we saw the results in the midterms, but we also saw in 2024 what happened on the down ballot. We didn't win the top of the ticket, but hell, we did fairly well on some of the bottom of the ticket. Look at North Carolina.
But you've slipped behind in registration advantages in places like Pennsylvania and Nevada, which are key to winning the White House and to winning Congress and holding on to key state houses. As I said, the brand is not in great shape in a lot of other places where you're going to need to win. You can appreciate why there are many in the party who think it's time for something completely different. Well, if we've been at it for 8-10 years in a certain way.
Well, I would push back on that. The reason why, we had the best midterm election for incumbent president since the 1930s. Right? We won governor's races in places that people never thought that we would win.
Right, but you just lost the White House.
In Kentucky and Kansas. But this is the thing, Ed. You might just think about the White House, but people who are living in those states are thinking about their governors and their Congress people and their legislators. Right? We've made tremendous gains in those things. I know in 176-year history, people have written the epithet of the Democratic Party a lot of times, and people are trying to write it again. But don't sleep on this Democratic Party. What we have to do is to build on the infrastructure that we have built, continue and invest in the red states. But look at North Carolina is a perfect example. Kamala lost in North Carolina. But what happened in 2024 in North Carolina? We won governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, superintendent of public instruction, and a Supreme Court race that the Republicans are currently trying to steal right now, right? That is in a state that Democrats did not do well in the past few years. It is because we invested in infrastructure in that state. And that is how you continue to win.
A lot of people around you, Congressman Clyburn, some of your associates here, have endorsed Ken Martin. Why not just endorse Ken Martin?
Because
wouldn't he be the best continuation of?
I said Ken is a dear friend of mine, and I think he would be one hell of a chair. But there are a lot of good candidates who I think who would do a really good job as chair as well. I said when I started this process that I was not going to publicly endorse and do that, and I'm going to continue that.
So you're arguing, yes, you lost the White House, yes, you lost control of the Senate, no, you didn't pick up control of the House, but overall, it wasn't that bad for Democrats in 24?
Well, my argument is there's a lot of good in there, and you build on the good. You don't just burn down the whole house. I mean, listen, if the Republicans took the prescription that you're just saying right now, then why would they have won? Because they lost in 20. They lost the White House, they lost the House, lost the Senate. And did they throw their hands up and say, oh God, we got to burn everything down? No, they didn't. The political pendulum in this country is swinging back and forth, and it's swinging back and forth a lot.
Who right now is the leader of the Democratic Party?
Well, I think there are a lot of leaders in the Democratic Party. I don't know if there's one sole leader. We don't have a president at this point, a Democratic president. And so you have leaders in the House, you have leaders in the Senate, you have leaders in some of the other organizations. And that's the one thing that I think people have to understand. The Democratic Party is an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that is made up of a lot of Democratic organizations that are led by a lot of Democratic leaders. And they all have to work together in coordination and conjunction as we move forward to the 2026 midterm elections, and then eventually get someone who's that one sole leader in terms of our nominee and then the eventual next president.
It is a vast ecosystem that at times finds itself in disagreement. If you're asked by regular everyday Democrats or one of those leaders, they call and say, how should we be responding to Donald Trump right now? What would you say?
Well, one of the things I think they have to push back hard and forcefully in terms of the craziness that is coming out of the White House. I think the strategy for Republicans and Donald Trump and his ilk over there is to flood the zone. It's just to have so much chaos that it makes it hard and difficult to really focus on any one thing, because all of it's like playing whack-a-mole. It's one demon popping up after the next, and you're trying to knock them all down. You got to pick your battles.
That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern.